James, Tim, thank you both very much indeed for joining us at an interesting moment. 1 hour after the results come out of the first ballot, I've just come from Central Lobby, and it is sort of House of Cards stuff in there. All sorts of people claiming that they've won and the future is theirs. Just what was your first take as you saw those numbers, Tim?
Well, I guess like most people's, it was Boris is definitely going to be in the final two. I can't see any way that anyone is going to catch him. I guess my second thought was I was a little bit surprised that Sajid Javid scored what he did. I thought he might have done a little bit better. There was a sense, maybe just from journalists actually, that he'd done very well yesterday in his launch. His video was very well thought of, and I guess maybe I bought into the idea that there was a bit more momentum there than there seems to be.
Likewise, obviously Boris going through, Boris going to win. I mean, but setting that aside, the other gap that's interesting is the Gove Hunt gap.
It's not as wide as Jeremy Hunt would like at all.
No,
is
indeed. And two things. I mean, before. There's a funny sort of bit of tweeting from Jeremy Hunt this morning. So this is referring to his wedding day, and there's a big surprise on the way.
Yes.
And also, there's this general idea that actually since
might have been domestic.
But you've had that sort of sense in the air, and all the idea has been put about that Hunt's got all the momentum. There's a few endorsements have gone his way that would otherwise we thought have gone to Gove, and that the Gove campaign was feeling he was looking a bit becalmed. I mean, speculations are that he's going to pull out, but actually here you are. You've only got six. There's only 6 votes in it. On the way here, I bumped into a friend of Gove, capital letters, who said, look, as you go into next week, people will essentially realise the fundamental truth of this is that the next leader has to be a proper Brexiteer, and there is only one alternative Brexiteer to Boris on these numbers, and that is Michael Gove, and therefore he's still in it, and he's going to keep going, and don't be surprised if we do actually get back to that glorious, long-foretold psychodrama of Michael versus Boris Johnson versus Gove next week. So it's not impossible.
No, and I'd agree with that. I mean, barring the the cocaine use story, I mean, Michael Gove has got every bit as good a claim as Jeremy Hunt has to be a safe pair of hands and a reasonable minister as well. So if you're looking for the kind of antitype of Boris, in other words, someone's competent and someone who you can trust to perform in Parliament, for example, as well as in public office in all sorts of other ways, Hunt hasn't got a big advantage over Gove in that sense at all, I think.
And it sounded a little bit, talking to some people in the different camps just now, as though some people in the Sajid Javid camp saying this on the record, that the challenger to Boris Johnson should come from the Gove, Sajid Javid, Hancock trio, that somehow they all have something in common. They're a bit sort of modernising, a bit different, and Jeremy Hunt is staid, major public school, continuity Theresa May. Anything in that, do you think? They're even talking about them coming together for talks, some of the people.
I mean, this is I guess this is the really, the interesting question is, what if you are a modernising, reform-inclined, one nation, middle of the road, whatever term you want to use it. So, if you're that sort of Tory, the big question you've had from throughout this process is, do you buy into the idea that Boris, the hard Brexiteer, will get in and do hard Brexit for the Brexiteers, but then pivot back to the centre? So therefore, do you join this group of reformers for Boris, moderates for Boris, who think that that's where his instincts lies, and then he can be steered?
He won't really do what he promised the ERG he'd do. Crash through the October 31st barrier.
But also on domestic policy, that he'll be quite interested in doing some the reforming continuity Cameron agenda stuff. Now, there's quite a lot of people who've gone for that. I mean, it's no secret there are Tory MPs who are backing Boris this week, who voted for him today, who don't think he's actually a very good thing, but who think that they can make him a bit better, that they can steer him. Also, there's
one of them said to me, "The devil's going to win. You've got to tame the devil."
Yeah, well, I mean, to which obviously the contra-argument to that is, well, hang on a minute. If you think this guy is going to get in, if he's capable of betraying the ERG over Brexit, surely he's capable of betraying you over domestic reform as well. I mean, there's a great question of who will have influence over Boris, and the parallel to draw is the Trump question. the critique of that is, well, people said that Trump would get in, he'd pander to nationalism, and then he'd actually listen to the Republican Party grandees, and therefore, if the party
machine would control him.
Anyway, open question. So, do you go that way, or originally at the start of this process, do you go for Gove because, well, it's going to be it has to be a leaver. So we have a leaver who's also a domestic reformer, and Michael Gove ticked those boxes perfectly. Up until the cocaine story, he was the best vehicle for reform-minded Tories. But obviously that's now thrown up in the air, and they are trying to work out which of I think you're right, which of those three is now the best alternative. And we'll see over I think the next 72 hours or so which of Gove, Javed, Hancock can sort of suck up as many of those those moderates as are on the market.
We used to be told that Michael Gove, I think he was told via David Cameron from Linton Crosby, that he was voter repellent.
Well, I think he's certainly teacher repellent. I would have to say that although he's seen as a successful minister, I think by many of his colleagues, in terms of the public perception of him, a lot of people remember the education secretary years, which he pushed through reforms which weren't particularly popular with the profession or indeed actually with parents either. He's kind of made up for that in the public perception, I think, with his work as environment secretary. In some ways, because climate change is coming up the agenda, I think it was easier for him to do that, and I think people take him seriously in that respect. But I think also the other important thing is actually performing in Parliament, and I think one of the things that people forget about Boris Johnson, including his colleagues, is that he is not in the slightest an impressive performer in the House of Commons. He never has been, and actually that is an incredibly important part of Prime Minister, not just of being Prime Minister, not just in PMQs, but also leading off on debates and on legislation. And if you can't do that, that is a basic part of the job description of PM. And Gove can certainly do that, and has proved very recently with a much watched, almost sort of viral attack on Jeremy Corbyn in the Commons that he really can do it in the Commons.
James, what do you make of the Rory Stewart phenomenon?
Britain is in the grips of Rory mania. Two things. I think it's interesting that he's made it through next week. It will make any TV debates quite spicy, given that he's getting more and more outspoken, particularly about Boris Johnson. So if he does end up head to head with Boris or sharing a stage with Boris Johnson in any way, that will be very lively. I mean, what do I think about it overall? There is a critique in Conservative circles of Rory Stewart. It says, well, he's the candidate for people who don't vote Tory, and that's somehow seen as a bad thing. Now, in the context of this contest, it is a bad thing because the job is being decided by Tory members. But the fact that being seen as someone who appeals to non-Tory voters from out with the core vote is seen as a bad thing. That tells you quite a lot about the current mentality of the Conservative Party.
That's normally what happens when you're in a sort of purist moment in opposition in the wilderness.
Yeah.
Not in government.
And it's interesting. If you think back once upon a time to a man called Boris Johnson, who 5-6 years ago, if you look at the polls, he had name recognition, which Rory Stewart doesn't, but he had an ability to appeal to people outside the normal Conservative stockade. He had, because as Mayor of London, he was a relatively liberal, moderate figure, whisper it, and he had the ability to persuade particularly urban, degree-educated, small L liberal voters to think maybe, he's a Tory, but he's okay. Which I think Rory Stewart is just developing, some of that at the same
for a new age.
For a new age, and Boris has completely lost it. Boris has lost that
that
Heineken ability. In polling terms, if you talk to any of the pollsters, they will tell you that Boris Johnson today is essentially a different politician entirely to the one he was 5, 6, 7 years ago.
Because of Brexit.
Brexit transformed him utterly, and that I think has not really been registered well enough at Westminster, because obviously he's the same person, but his political proposition, the offer, is very different. The people he appeals to is very different.
The MPs just don't seem to be, Tim, talking about who's going to help us win the election. An awful lot of them talking about who's going to help us avoid an election.
Well, I think so, and that comes down to their obsession with the idea that unless they deliver Brexit, the next election is lost. But for me, really, that ignores the fact that the other side of that choice, as it were, is what might happen if we do, quote unquote, crash out of the EU. And the consequences that could have for the country, and the consequences those consequences could have for the Conservative Party. So, I mean, I think Conservative MPs have to think to themselves now, are we going to lose more votes by not delivering Brexit on the 31st of October, come what may, or are we going to lose more votes by delivering it, by crashing out, all the possible downside consequences of doing that being blamed on the Conservative Party, and therefore losing the election that way. And if we think back to 1992, the ARM crisis, that did for the Conservative Party's reputation for economic competence in almost one evening, and that was just one evening when people thought their interest rates on their house mortgage was going to go up to 18%. That is going to be as nothing compared to the consequences of crashing out of the EU without a deal, I would suggest. So they have to be very, very careful.
I want to come back to what next under a new leader and a prime minister and all the rest of it. But before we do, Tim, you've been doing some digging into the activists, the people who'll choose between the final two. What are you finding out about, let's start with the people who say they support Boris Johnson. Are they besotted? Are they long-standing supporters? Is there any chance of movement there?
Well, the long-standing point is a very interesting one, because the data suggests that actually Boris is supported by a lot more people who have joined the party after 2016 than he is by people who were in the party before 2016. So that does suggest that a lot of people have come into the party because they want to see Brexit done, and they're the ones supporting Boris Johnson. So that's a very important point.
One issue dominates for them. They're almost one issue.
Yes, but actually, if you look at their attitudes on other issues as well, they tend to be more right-wing, funnily enough, socially. So the Liberal Boris has gone, as far as they're concerned, and they're also rather more right-wing on the economy. So they would like the state out of the economy. They're keen on tax cuts and those kinds of things. So actually, Boris is really now appealing to that kind of core Conservative Party member, pretty right-wing, pretty socially conservative, very, very Brexity. On the demographics, there's not much difference, actually, interestingly, between him and the other candidates.
Any idea how many of them came into the party because Aaron Banks and a few other people told them to?
No, I wish I knew the answer to that.
What would be your guess?
Well, look, if we say that probably a third of the Conservative Party members have joined since 2016, at a rough guess, it might be more than that. I think you'd have to assume that people joining the Conservative Party after 2016 were very keen on Brexit rather than not being keen on Brexit. Some of them may have come direct from UKIP, but some of them, of course, may have gone to UKIP after being Conservatives and then, returned home. So it's actually a very, very difficult thing to do to put a figure on it. The other interesting thing is how many of them are registered supporters of the Brexit Party. Of course, because it's perfectly possible to be a Conservative Party member and sign up for Nigel Farage's new outfit.
And nobody knows.
Nobody knows, absolutely not. So
we're pretty sure, two polling of Conservative Party members tends to be quite accurate. Two of them have suggested around about 60% of members voted Brexit Party in the European Parliament election.
Yeah, they do seem to, have used Nigel Farage as a way of pushing the party towards the kind of Brexit that they want to see. But after all,
if he was on the ticket, do you think he'd win?
That is a really good question. I'm not so sure. I think that Conservative Party members still have the idea of the Tory party as being the natural party of government, and I'm not so sure that they would like to see quite such a disruptive figure, albeit a very charismatic one, leading their party and leading the country. But that's only a guess, of course.
James, do you think the activists could surprise us if there is another name? Let's say Michael Gove, Jeremy Hunt on that ticket.
Could do, but I think it's unlikely. I think from what I understand of Tim's data on and research on this, the interesting thing about the Conservative membership these days is actually, in terms of their attitudes on economic policy, social policy, they lean to the right, but they're not hugely out of kilter with large parts of the population. They're not unusual. I mean, there's an idea, people talk about this idea of them being sort of, deeply right-wing pensioners. Actually, on all but one issue, they're not. They're within the bounds of the sort of the normal, the sort of political norm.
Yeah, they're certainly representative of Conservative voters, anyway. Yeah.
But then on Brexit, it's the outlier. The outlier of the value is Brexit. I mean, the number of them who said they would be delighted if we left with no deal.
Well, it's now gone up to 2/3 of them.
2/3 of Conservative members would be delighted if
there'd be street parties
if we left with no deal,
or maybe dinner parties.
What that suggested in terms of you've got that position on Brexit, and also the salience of Brexit. It is a really important thing, and that suggests very strongly that the voting decision on this is going to turn on who's the most Brexity candidate. And Boris has as well as having this whole question of is he the best person to win an election, the rest of it, he has a pretty strong lock on the claim to be Mr. Brexit because he fronted the campaign. He's made a pretty clear promise. He's trying to sneak away from it now. That come what may, hell or high water, we're leaving on the 31st of October, and he will be up against. Well, it now looks. I think. He will be up against somebody who will not match that promise.
Yeah, because it's very doubtful that Dominic Raab's going to be in the last two. So I agree.
That I think will be the decisive factor. Who's most Brexity, and almost certainly Boris is going to be the most Brexity candidate.
And do you think if he was Prime Minister, we would be out 1st November, or just possibly still in?
Well, I mean, I think from talking to people that Boris genuinely believes that he can get something that Theresa May couldn't get because she refused to suggest credibly that she was going to walk away from the negotiations and that she was willing to contemplate no deal, and therefore he, by being serious about contemplating no deal, can make Brussels blink. Now, I have my doubts about that. Talking to people from the mainland Europe, I'm not sure they are going to blink, and that then sets up the question for him, okay, if they don't blink, what are you going to do? And I still find it quite difficult to believe that Parliament will allow a no-deal Brexit, despite the vote yesterday.
There will be other means.
So I think there will be other means. And I'm not even sure that Boris, and it comes back to something that James said, would really want to do that to the country and to the Conservative Party, because I think the consequences would be very, very difficult, and I'm not sure the government can recover.
Do you think, James, that's his dream scenario? He pushes for no deal, but naughty Parliament lets him down, and he's got a grievance. And
but then what?
Yeah, well, that was my next question.
To this question, will Parliament allow it? I mean, I think, constitutional nicety aside, if Parliament doesn't want something, it doesn't happen. And I think the Parliament does not want no deal. So I think that is a pretty firm, a pretty strong block. So if you think this through, the logic of this, you are now Boris. You are Prime Minister Boris Johnson. If you think that no deal is not actually a parliamentary option, that if you push for it, you'll be pushed back into something. The two ways around that block are a new referendum to give you a mandate to clear the parliamentary obstacle, or a general election that removes the parliamentary obstacle by giving you a new majority. Now, do you want to be forced into that, having failed to deliver on your promise of leaving on the 31st of October? And we know that if there's one thing, the final straw for Theresa May was failing to deliver on the promise to leave on the 29th of March. So do you want to be forced into one of those two options and miss the deadline, or do you want to run towards it and do it on your own terms? I mean, I have had a few conversations in the last 24 hours with people who are wondering whether or not actually Prime Minister Boris Johnson's first act in office, or an early act in office, might be to say, you know what, I need a new mandate, bring it on. I choose a general election. I will run towards the guns.
Not sure that's what he's been promising Tory MPs in his
But I think if you go through the options,
do it before anyone's got time to think about it.
It may ultimately be the least bad option for him.
And I mean, if you look back at what Theresa May did, I mean, I think her mistake wasn't necessarily calling a snap election, but it was calling a snap election that wasn't really a snap election. It was months after she'd taken over.
At least would have an argument you could make for calling it.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think honeymoon period. you never know. He might recover some of that kind of
yeah.
Stardust
Anyway,
quality, and he can do Parliament versus the people.
I mean, he'll start. He'll start. I mean, there are lots of problems with this. I'm not for a second suggesting it will definitely happen, but you can see how the case could be made for him. Particularly, he'll start out with a personal poll rating that's a long way ahead of Jeremy Corbyn's. So he'll be able to say, "Look, trust me, I'm a winner. He's a loser. Come with me. We will smash them once and for all. We'll go to the country. We'll get the mandate. We'll get the mandate for Brexit. Get it done by October. Off we go."
The conventional wisdom is that he'd rather press the button for a second referendum. You think that might have been oversold?
But a referendum, again, how do you do it? Because a referendum referendum needs to go through Parliament. So can you get the legislation through both houses before the 31st of October? Not sure. What's on the ballot paper? There are a number of his colleagues on the ERG hard Brexit side who would not be happy to see a second referendum where Remain was on the ballot paper, but Parliament will not allow a referendum where Remain is not on the ballot paper. If you talk to some of the scarred veterans of the Leave campaign, they are very, very wary of another referendum because they think that they would struggle to motivate the base to get the differential turnout that's went from last time. They think they'd be up against the entire establishment again, and they're not sure where Farage and his people would be in that referendum. So, second referendum not that attractive.
The other option that gets talked about is that actually he uses that moment of momentum and the honeymoon to push through something that's an awful lot like Theresa May's deal with a cherry on top.
Yeah.
What odds do you put on that?
That has to be the number one option, surely.
And the funniest option as well.
Yeah. But I think there may be a degree of goodwill towards him among some Conservative MPs. Yeah.
DUP as well, maybe?
Possibly, but there wasn't.
Depends on the bill.
Yeah, but absolutely. But there wasn't there for Theresa
if you look
May.
at,
He may get something in the political declaration if if he can't reopen the
funnily enough,
withdrawal agreement.
Look at Matt Hancock's Brexit plan, and you look Matt Hancock's Brexit plan. Broadly speaking, is renegotiate the political declaration, which the EU have been saying overtly. Let's talk about that. We can talk about that. Rewrite the political declaration to talk about Canada or something, or some aspirational free trade deal, which allows Boris to say yes, Canada plus. Open-ended commitment to look at alternative arrangements. Barnier, he said in an interview a few weeks ago, we can talk about it. It's just going to take time. Broadly speaking, this scenario, Boris goes to Brussels, and there would be. I know he's hated in lots of EU capital. Utterly hated. But there's still the point for the EU is the EU would rather have a managed Brexit than a no-deal Brexit. So if they think that they can give him something that can pass, and this is the important thing, can a deal pass Parliament? If they think you can put together a package that he can bring back bluntly and present. So he goes to Brussels, he lies about getting concessions, he comes back, Tory MPs lie about believing him that he's won concessions, and then voted through along with 20 odd Labour MPs who really want to vote for a deal. Corbyn wants Brexit to happen. Corbyn wants Brexit to happen on a Tory watch. You can see how that sort of coincidence of interest
worked for Harold Wilson. Worked for Harold Wilson back in 74, 75.
It's a huge sales job because it would be absolutely that. It would be adding a bit of glitter to the Theresa May deal.
Maybe a font size.
Changing the font is what it's called in Brussels.
I think the position of the ERG will be interesting there because, of course, a lot of them have come out for Boris in this contest and will come out for Boris in this contest. It will be quite hard for them, I think, to suddenly flip round and
say...
They
were all there at the launch just yesterday.
This guy is the worst thing we've ever seen, he's a traitor, etc., etc. They might just have to suck it up, really, given their support for him during the leadership.
They were fanatic when I came out. They were absolutely clear that he had told them to their face...
But he said yesterday at his launch. He said, "I want a deal." Yeah, he said, He said, "I'm not targeting." Let's take him at face value. I'm not targeting
a
deal.
He's talking about love bombing Europe.
Yeah, I want you. He says he wants a deal. Maybe he means it.
It's the caveat was very clear. The vote of no confidence gets talked about a lot, and of course Dominic Grieve raised the temperature yesterday. But I was looking at what was happening on the Labour side, and perhaps even more interestingly, amongst the independents. If you are an independent, you haven't got an enormous machine to get re-elected with. and you're not necessarily as susceptible to the charms of a vote of no confidence in an early general election, are you? And it was quite interesting looking down the list, almost to a man and a woman. Some of those genuinely independents were really not voting for Christmas. And I wonder whether that's whether we overestimate just the chances of voting no confidence. I'm told that one of the people close to Boris Johnson, who's rather good at counting numbers in the House of Commons, is convinced that.
I wonder who that person is.
Well, you make a very good point actually, because of course, we always have to remember with the votes of no confidence that you don't, funnily enough, have to win them as such. You just have to not lose them, and of course, people abstaining,
there needn't be dignity.
Can make a big difference. So I think, Gary, you've got a very good point there.
Is this what we've just seen the first results of it, and more hustings next week and the rest of it? Are we looking at a battle for the soul of the Conservative Party? I asked this question to a few Tory MPs just now who are on different campaigns, and the Rory Stewart campaign said, oh yes, definitely. The others said, paused, sucked their teeth, and then said, yes, I rather think it is.
I mean, I think so. I mean, I've spoken to a couple of the candidates who talk in exactly those terms. That this is a really quite fundamental decision on lots of things. Going as far as philosophy and theology, and you can, if you want to go terribly erudite, you can get into Edmund Burke and theories of government. Are MPs here to exercise their judgment on behalf of the electorate, or are they here just to carry out the will of the people? And there are people who see it in those terms, that electing Boris is essentially changing the understanding of what political representation is about, making the Conservative Party into the vehicle for the will of the people, not the organisation that delivers the national interest. There's also just a question, that simple question of electoral targeting, because if there is a view, I don't know, that says you elect Boris Johnson, who sets his lights towards a hard Brexit and prioritises taking on Nigel Farage, then that means you're saying goodbye to a lot of the basically the degree-educated, socially liberal Remain voting electorate, who are currently a part of the Tory coalition. And you're saying goodbye to, you're saying we'll never get Battersea back.
He thinks he can hold on to Battersea. He still thinks he's got the magic, doesn't he, that worked in London, Battersea included.
But again, see earlier point, he was a different politician who when he won London. That was pre-Brexit. Brexit has changed a lot. So there's a real question: does the Conservative Party want to become the Brexit Party? I mean, that's what that is an outcome here, or does it want to go on trying to straddle that gap? And because if it's going to become,
is it a gap that can be straddled?
Well, we'll come back for another week of discussion about whether or not Brexit is going to become the defining cleavage of British politics for the next decade. I mean, it's funnily enough, for about half the electorate it is, and for about half the electorate it's not.
But I mean, a related and awful irony for the Conservative Party is actually, absent Brexit, they don't actually disagree with each other. And absent, obviously, the strategic considerations you were talking about, they don't disagree with each other that much on, issues of left, right, those kinds of issues, the role of the state in the economy, the kind of things that politics used to be about. That the Conservative coalition could easily hold together on those kinds of things.
It's partly because they're just not talking about them.
There's
a missing conversation. I was talking to somebody about this yesterday. There's a missing conversation about domestic policy. I mean, most Conservatives will basically sort of be aware there's a crisis of capitalism, something, markets, faith, economy, wages, not quite sure. What should we do about that? Don't know. We'll come back to that when we finish fighting about Europe. They much prefer fighting about Europe. Talking about serious domestic policy.
Yes, but what I'm trying to say is, I guess this is a party which could still, absent Brexit, contain people like Liz Truss, who are all very kind of small state, Britannia Unchained kind of conservatives, and then much more sort of noblesse oblige, organic conservatives, on the other side, Rory Stewart, etc., etc. It could still contain those people ideologically fairly easily.
But if we're divvying up the candidates, are you saying that there's the plausible candidates to win? Are you saying there's Boris on one side that takes us towards a different, sort of more like the Republican Party direction, and all of the others who are main contenders don't? Or are they, most of them, nodding so much towards Boris's tack that they take us in the Conservative Party in a Republican direction?
Well, I think they'll go so far but no further, and I think Boris will go further. That's the point. Yeah.
You're nodding, James.
I think it's true. I think it depends who you put in that bracket of plausible candidates.
So let's say that's Jeremy Hunt, Michael Gove, Sajid Javid, maybe Matt Hancock.
Yeah, I mean, I think actually the non-Boris people in that list are probably more likely to attempt some sort of party modernisation, some sort of reorientation of the party. One thing. So it's a related question, I suppose, in terms of the future of the party, which we haven't talked about so far, and we really should. Scotland. Scotland and the Union generally, but particularly Scotland. I mean, it's really interesting that Ruth Davidson has come out so strongly to bat for Sajid Javid. I mean, she was never going to back Boris. But that is one of the real interesting questions as to whether or not, bluntly, the Conservative Party has a future in Scotland and an interest in Scotland.
And might the Scottish Conservative Party have to separate so much it ceases to be one party of the Union?
Which Ruth Davidson would be deeply opposed to and not keen on. But I mean, boring parliamentary terms, the Tory party in government depends on Scottish seats at the moment. I mean, a little sort of subplot of this week, the Boris tax plan that was wheeled out on the front page of the Telegraph on Monday morning, which actually certainly startled, basically pushing up tax cuts for people over 50 grand, which certainly startled some of the moderates for Boris who thought that he was heading in the progressive direction. I think it took them about 2 days to work out what that would actually mean for Scotland and say, oh no, we take care of it through the block grant. But it generally feeds this idea that Boris, on the whole, not that interested in Scotland, wouldn't mind that much if it went away. It's certainly and Boris not terribly popular in Scotland.
Yeah, and there are still many Conservative MPs who buy into the idea that you get rid of Scotland, you get rid of the prospect of a kind of SNP Labour coalition, or even a Labour government.
What's not to like?
What's not to like apart from this historic legacy commitment to the Union? Do people like that care about that kind of thing anymore? I rather doubt it, actually.
Can I just say Conservative and Unionist Party? Conservative and Unionist Party.
Final question, and Tim, this goes to some of your recent research into Conservative grassroots, but David Cameron said he was going to modernise the Conservative Party. You've just been delving into it. They're about to choose our next Prime Minister. How did that go, that modernisation?
Well, it was always half-hearted at best, I think, and to be honest, he never really gained the trust of large numbers of Conservative Party members for that modernisation project. And I think one of the reasons, it's not the only reason, he lost the Conservative Party so badly on Brexit was simply, they never really bought it. They never really loved him. They just thought he was an electoral winner. And for a while he was.
But also the interesting thing, neither he nor Theresa May, never. I mean, the Cameron project, they never really bothered with genuine grassroots transformation. I mean, it is possible. Tony Blair did it. Jeremy Corbyn did it. It is possible to bring hundreds of thousands of new members into a political party. You can, if you organise, if you put your mind to it, if you do all the boring stuff of membership drives and sign-ups, you can actually change a party. That's why Jeremy Corbyn is still where he is at the moment. He changed the Labour Party. He brought in 350,000 new members. Cameron oversaw. He went from 350,000 members to about 120,000.
Yeah, a decline, absolutely.
There was a brief attempt at the very early days of the Cameron leadership to offer sort of £1 affiliation memberships, things like that. But then they basically realised this whole grassroots organising, local party stuff was quite boring. So the modernisation for Cameron was about essentially rebranding at the top end, but not about a fundamental change in the business. Down at the down there in the country.
I've indicated, you kind of indicated, James, where your thinking was going, but and I'm keen to ask you just both as we finish. The podcast is called Politics Where Next. Are you going to tell me who the other name is on that ticket? I think you think it's Michael Gove.
I think it is more likely to be Michael Gove.
But he doesn't win in the end.
Than the current consensus in this postcode suggests.
I'll let you off with that.
Is that Weasley enough?
But Boris wins.
I think Boris wins.
Tim.
I think it's Boris's to lose, but he is the kind of person who could lose it. Let's put it that way.
Can I say I've just broken a rule by calling him Boris. I think we should all try and stay used to calling him Johnson.
I was actually thinking that.
Yes, no, I know, and I think I'm allowed one exception because I used to work with him. And I was his editor at the Telegraph. So I was slightly confused by him as Boris, my former colleague, against Johnson, the politician. But we should all start calling him Johnson the same way
we should just call him the same as everyone else.
Yes, absolutely.
Al.
Oh, no, there's a story.
Tim, James, on a busy day, thank you both very much indeed for sparing the time to share your thoughts. Thank you very much.